Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our June webinar. I hope it's not gray and rainy where you are like it is in Albany, but I think we might see the sun tomorrow, so that's something to look forward to. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you get disconnected from this call for any reason, log back in immediately and also notify us by emailing us just to say, I got disconnected, but I got right back on. And also, if you have any issues getting right back on, you can email us here and we will do our best to try to guide you. If you are using the GoToWebinar app on your iPhone, it will show us that you logged in, but sometimes there just is a discrepancy with how long you are on the webinar. So you are going to be needing to pay special attention to the number I'm about to give you. In case we need to verify the length of time you were on the webinar, the number is 36. So the number 36, I only need this if I ask you. So please don't worry about emailing me and telling me what the number is. At the time of registration, you were asked to provide the names of all of those who are sitting in with you watching this webinar. Please let us know immediately via email if there were any names you missed putting on the list. In order to receive credit for this webinar, you must have been pre-registered through the NYSFDA portal, and then your name must appear on the GoToWebinar report. Following this webinar, we do ask that you give us 7 to 10 business days for your portal to reflect that your credit has been posted, and you will also receive a mail certificate. If you have any questions during the webinar, you all know how to type those questions in. So please go ahead and do that, and we will answer them for you. And again, the number is 36, and that's only if I ask. You will need to know the number 36 from the beginning of the webinar. At this time, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Mark Markel. Mark is a professor emeritus at St. Cloud State University in the Department of Education and Department of Multicultural Education. He also teaches at Worsham College of Mortuary Science and Edgewood College. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Well, today we are going to talk about working with people with dementia. As you see at the bottom, my name is Mark Markel, and I have a CT after my name, and a lot of people don't know what that is. In fact, I didn't know what it was until I got into the field, and that is that I'm a certified thanatologist, which is a study of death, dying, and grief. Okay, next slide. Today we're going to start off with a brief introduction, and I want to just say a few things about how I got interested in this whole area of dementia and working with funeral homes. And then we'll have a couple of short stories that illustrate people living with dementia. And both of these stories have to do with people that are living with advanced dementia. We'll talk about what is dementia, just a little bit about medical advances, some key messages about dementia, myths and realities, and we'll do some little polls to see if people can decide whether a statement is a myth or a reality. What should people with dementia be told about death? How to tell a person with dementia about death, if indeed that is what the family decides to do. Communication with the funeral director, funerals, and any questions, comments, or concerns. And as Kelly said, to make sure to ask questions as we go along in the chat or in the questions, and we'll answer the questions as they come up. So next slide. As Kelly was saying, I teach at Edgewood College in the Masters of Thanatology program. I actually teach 2 courses, Spiritual Dimensions of Death and Dying and Ethics of Death and Dying. And both of these courses I co-teach with my sister Katie, and we have been working together for a number of years in presenting and writing and now teaching. And I teach at Worsham College of Mortuary Science. I teach psychology with an emphasis in funeral service. So it's different than a general psychology course in that it's geared specifically toward funeral directors. And I am from St. Cloud State University. And then I also volunteer with Brighter Days Grief Center, and I do presentations and I facilitate grief support groups for parent loss, LGBTQ plus loss, sibling loss, and children and loss. Okay, next. As an introduction, I want to say that I have lived with dementia, not myself personally, but with my family members for a number of years. In fact, when I was young as 4, my grandmother had dementia. And then my grandmother on the other side of the family had dementia. Aunts and uncles and cousins have had dementia. So since I was young, I assumed that when I got older, I would develop dementia. Now, there's no causal link hereditarily with dementia. However, there is some link in terms of other diseases that people can have that dementia is manifested as one of the symptoms. One of the things that I want to be real clear about is that I am not scared about it. I know I've talked to a number of people who have lived with a family member with dementia and are really scared that they will at some point develop dementia. But I have always wanted to be aware and educated and planning. And even at this stage of my life, which it's more likely that I would develop dementia in the near future if I'm going to develop it, I want to plan. And so that's what I have been doing. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy talking about dementia, because I think that it's something that people don't get to talk about enough. Okay, next slide. I have 2 short stories, and these are based on reality, though I've changed the names in some of the situations so that they remain anonymous. But I want to just read these because then later, as we're going through the presentation, I want to refer back to a couple things in the stories that illustrate what a person living with dementia may experience. So Herman Jarvis, who was a funeral director, greeted Banner and his sister Rona and their mother Bee as they arrived to make funeral arrangements for Clyde, Banner and Rona's father and Bee's husband. Herman noticed that Bee was looking around the funeral home and didn't respond when he introduced himself. Banner sat down and Rona guided Bee to a chair. "Where are we?" Bee asked as she sat. "We're at the funeral home," Rona answered. "Funeral home? Oh no, who died?" "Mother, Dad died." "My father died? Oh, that's so sad. Why didn't you tell me?" "No, Mom, my dad, your husband, died last night." "Oh, sweetie, I don't have a husband. Mother won't even let me date yet. How silly of you to think that I'm married." And then she laughed. "Where are we? Oh, this is such a nice room and so clean." Bea looked as she touched the table. Bea looked around the room. "What a beautiful home you have here. I'm Bea. What's your name?" Herman said his name. "It's so nice to meet you. Do you know Banner from college?" "Remember, Mom," Rona said, "we're making a funeral arrangements for Dad." "Why would we make funeral arrangements for your father? He's at home." Bea turned to Herman. "He would have come today, but he's very tired." "I haven't met you yet. I'm Bea. What's your name?" Herman said his name again. "What a beautiful dining room table. Is this where we're going to have dinner?" "I haven't met you. I'm Bea." Herman introduced himself again. Rona looked at Herman. She's been this way for almost a year, but the last few weeks have been even worse. Now she's even more confused than ever before. "Are we at church?" Bea asked. "No, we're at the funeral home," Rona said. "Oh no, who died?" "Mom," Rona said. "Mother isn't here," Bea said. "She went to the garden. She'll be back soon. The tomatoes are so big this year." Rona looked at Herman with tears in her eyes. "This is driving me crazy, seriously crazy." Story number 2. Jose and Ana had been together for 55 years. When they retired, they spent most of their time together. Ana was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. At first, she just seemed a little confused, but by the time Jose became ill with a terminal disease, she had difficulty remembering people outside of the family. As Jose approached the end of his life, he started to sleep a great deal of time. And even when he was awake, he had difficulty interacting with Ana and others. When Jose died, Ana was very confused and asked repeatedly, "Where is your father?" At first, Elena would tell her that Jose died. Each time Elena told Ana about Jose's death, Ana became very upset and started to scream and cry for a long period of time. Then shortly after screaming and crying, she would ask again. This pattern continued many times a day. Elena had decided not to take her mother to the funeral. She realized it may be too painful for her mom. When Elena got home from the funeral, Ana asked where Jose was. Now, each time that Ana asked Elena about Jose's whereabouts, Elena would just say, "Oh, he just stepped out for a few minutes." After a few days, however, Ana would tell Elena that she thought she was lying and demanded to know where Jose was. Elena then contacted a friend whose father had gone through a similar experience when his mother died. After the talk, Elena told her mother, when she asked about Jose, that she wasn't sure where he was, but she would go and see if she could find him. Elena then would leave the room for a few moments, come back, and distract her mother by enlisting her mother's help with some activity that she and Ana would enjoy doing together, such as putting a puzzle together or cooking. These, again, illustrate, even though they are fictionalized, they illustrate what somebody with dementia might be experiencing around the death of a significant person. Okay, next slide. So what is dementia? Dementia is a general term for the diminished ability to think or make decisions that restrict doing everyday activities. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, and we'll be talking more about the different types in just a moment. Next slide. Now we have poll question number 1. Have you interacted with anyone with dementia during funeral arrangements or at the funeral memorial service? Select one of the following: yes, no, or maybe. Maybe you don't know. So we'll just take a few moments to do that. All right, so about 72% said yes, they have interacted with someone with dementia. About 20% said no, and about 8% said maybe they weren't sure if they had or had not. So given that so many people have had experience with people with dementia, certainly chime in, ask questions, make comments. Was your experience the same as what we're going to be talking about, or was it different than what we're going to be talking about? Okay, next. The life expectancy for someone diagnosed with dementia is 8 to 10 years after diagnosis. However, it's less if the person is diagnosed in their 80s or 90s. It's the most common in women, among Latinx and African American communities, and people with less formal educational opportunities. The prevalence is likely to increase significantly over the next decades because more people are living longer. Next. There are many different types of conditions that lead to dementia or have dementia as one of the manifestations of the illness or the disease, such as Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, Parkinson's disease dementia, Huntington's dementia, and most of these dementias are not reversible. Often people use the terms dementia and Alzheimer's interchangeably or as synonyms, because Alzheimer's accounts for about 75% of dementia diagnoses, even though there are just one of over 100 types of dementia. So not all dementias are Alzheimer's, though most are. Next. Just a few words about medical advances. Next. There have been a variety of medications that have been used to help with dementia. However, none of the medications will cure dementia. They manage symptoms and slow the progression of the disease in some people. They can support memory, thinking, language abilities, and help address mood changes and behavioral challenges. Next. These are just a few of the medications that have been developed to work with people with dementia and manage their symptoms. I'm not going to read through them, but you can see that these are just a few of the many different medications. So if one medication doesn't work or isn't as effective as they would like it to be, they can try a different medication or try adjusting the doses or do some combinations. Next. Okay, so here we have some myths and realities, and I'm going to read a statement, and then you get to decide whether it's a myth or a reality. Okay, next. Poll 2. Is this a myth or reality? Dementia is inevitable for elder adults. Myth or reality? All right, 92% said it's a myth and 8% said it's a reality. And as we'll see, it is a myth. The next slide. The reality is that although dementia typically impacts elder people, it is not inevitable with growing older. Some early onset affects people that are much younger than considered elder. In 2022, the prevalence rate was 1.7% of adults 65 to 74 had dementia. 5.7% of adults 75 to 84 have dementia, and 13.1% of adults 85 and older have dementia. So even in the group that has the highest percentage of adults with dementia, 85 and older, it's just slightly over 10% of the population. Next. Next poll, poll question 3. Is this a myth or reality? Dementia is just about forgetting. All right, so 96% said it was a myth and 4% said it was a reality. In listening to the definition of dementia, it does talk about forgetting, but it also talks about some other symptoms that may be part of dementia. So next slide. The reality is that dementia is not just about forgetting things and not remembering past events. Dementia is a group of symptoms that affects memory, thinking, and daily functioning. It's not a disease in and of itself, but it's a result of other diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's. Next slide. Poll question 4. Kind of rapid fire polling here. Dementia destroys a person's life and family. Generally, yes. Generally, no. It doesn't need to. Generally, yes, 22%. Generally, no, 2%. Does not need to, 76%. And we'll see in the next few slides the answer to whether this is a myth or reality. Okay, next slide. People can live well with dementia. Some people live with care providers, such as spouses, children, siblings, while others live in assisted living, nursing homes, memory care residents, or independently until the disease that has manifested the dementia has gotten so bad that they're unable to function on a daily basis by themselves. Care providers can receive assistance and learn effective ways to interact with the loved ones and continue to have a loving relationship with the person with dementia. Next. Poll 5. A person with dementia should always be told about a death. Yes, no, depends on circumstances. Yes, 9%, no, 4%, and depends on circumstances, 87%. All right, next slide, and we will talk about whether this is a myth or reality. So, what to say about death? Next slide. Everyone experiences grief in a unique way, and it's the same for people that live with dementia. For people with dementia, dealing with death depends on how advanced the dementia is and what symptoms they are exhibiting. In early stages of dementia, people understand the loss and even hold information about the death for long periods of time. They may have intermittent times of forgetting. So it could be that somebody understands the death and then at some point might say, well, where is my husband? And somebody says, well, remember they died. And the person with dementia might say, oh, yes, you're right, they died. So they might forget for momentarily, but then remember again. Whereas people with more advanced dementia may not remember at all. Next slide. Advanced dementia, it's often difficult to remember the person who died, and they may not understand the concept of death. So even if they can say, oh, yes, you know, my child died, when will they be coming back? And they're not understanding the permanence of death or maybe the universality of death. Care providers have a difficult decision to make about what information to share that they think would be helpful for the person with dementia. Funeral directors can help the care providers know that it is a difficult decision and it's theirs to make. And once the decision is made, there should be no shame or second guessing. The problem oftentimes is with other people and their expectations about what would or should be happening with the person with dementia, whether they should attend or not attend funeral activities. Next slide. So if others voice opinions of disagreement with the care provider's decision, either to have the person with dementia attend the funeral or memorial or not attend, some possible statements, kind of little scripts that you could give to a family to say, you could say something like this. We absolutely considered what you're saying. And although that was one choice, after a lot of thought, we decided, or thank you for your thoughts. As I'm sure you realize, this was a very difficult decision, and ultimately we decided, or thank you for caring. There were a lot of things that we had to consider, and we decided either to have the person attend or not attend. Okay, next. Some of the factors that might help families decide whether it would be appropriate to have the person with dementia attend the funeral or arrangements or visitation or one or all is that they would consider the person's cognitive abilities, ongoing behaviors, ability to remember information, and the person's personality. So it could very well be that they decide this person's behavior is such that it's going to be more disruptive for them and for others if they attend. And so they may choose not to have the person attend. Even if the person does not seem to comprehend the death, however, for some people, they may exhibit behaviors associated with grief because that's how others are behaving. So if a person is attending a funeral or a memorial or other events, it could be that they are just mimicking what other people are exhibiting in terms of behaviors. Next. People may be able to communicate understanding of the death during lucid moments. During times of confusion, they may talk about the person who died as though they're still alive, much like B did when they were talking about her husband who died and saying, oh no, he's not dead, he's at home and he was tired, that's why he didn't come today. Helping a person deal with death of a loved one can be challenging and complicated. Next. So if the family decides to tell the person with dementia about death, these are some thoughts, some tips as to how to go about doing that. Next. Give yourself time before the conversation to prepare and make sure that you have support for yourself. So you might want to run the conversation that you're going to say to the person with dementia by a trusted friend and say, what do you think? And they might be able to help you to formulate something that would be understandable and would be simple. Explain what happened in clear and simple manner. Phrases like gone to sleep or no longer with us might be very confusing. In fact, stay away from all euphemisms. We lost your husband last night. The person with dementia might very well think that the person is misplaced or has wandered off and isn't found, and so we better go find them. Also, don't give too much information at once. Simply talking about the death in a simple and clear manner and then not going into much detail at first might be helpful for the person so they can process that bit of information before going on. Next. Allow plenty of time for the conversation and be prepared to repeat information and be patient. Much like Herman just kept introducing himself when B said, I haven't met you yet. My name is B. What's your name? And he just kept introducing himself. So it could be that in telling a person about the death of a significant person, they might say, now who died? Repeatedly, or what happened to this person, or whatever it might be. So to be very patient and also to repeat information as needed. Use body language and physical contact if you think that's appropriate. If somebody with dementia doesn't like being touched, certainly don't touch them. But if a physical contact might be comforting, that might be helpful. If the person becomes very distressed, offer some reassurance, either verbally or by holding their hand. And it could be that if a person becomes very distressed, they might just sit and have you hold their hand for a long period of time, and that's fine too. It may be helpful to give the person some time to process the news and then try again later to say, you know, your husband died last night, and give them some time to process this, and then say your husband died last night and this is what happened and this is how he died and so on. So give the person a little bit of information at a time and let them process the information that they are given. Okay, next. So communication with the funeral director and the person with dementia. And these are just some helpful ideas. Next. If a person attends the arrangement meeting and if their dementia hasn't been progressed, one of the things that you can do to help them feel more a part of the arrangement is for the family to talk through different aspects of what's going to be at the funeral or memorial, and then decide on, let's say, 2 different types of flowers that they're going to order. And both types have to be absolutely okay with the family, because then the person with dementia can decide between those 2 different types of flowers. If they're in on a conversation about many different types of flowers, it might seem overwhelming. And so just to give them a choice, but give them a way of participating on a real limited basis. Also, the same thing could be done with caskets or urns, either the color or the type, prayer cards, foods. It also might be good at a funeral arrangement to provide some fidgets that, if the person chooses, that they could use to deal with anxiety. Sometimes it's helpful just to have something in their hand to be kind of playing with, so that they can manage their anxiety. Next. So it's difficult to answer the question, how do funeral directors interact with a person with dementia, because it depends on so many different factors. And it depends on the uniqueness of the symptoms that the person is exhibiting. Next. Some people with dementia may be just a little confused. Others may be disengaged and unable to remember things that were said, or even something that's said over the past few moments. Just like Anna and Elena. Anna mourned the death, grieved the death of her husband momentarily, and then forgot. And so then ended up grieving all over again. Some people with dementia may be agitated, irritable, or aggressive. However, it's unlikely the person that shows aggression would be taken to the funeral home for the arrangements or for any part of the funeral process. Next. If someone does become agitated or frustrated, the funeral director could distract the person. And if they do that, much like what Elena did, except it wouldn't be to that extent with Anna, is to say something like, oh, you know what, would you help me out by going through this book of flowers and putting a post-it note on each page that has yellow flowers? Because sometimes people request yellow flowers and I'm not exactly sure what page they're on. Would you be willing to do that? And they could either do it alone or with another person that's at the arrangement conference. And that might distract them enough so that they aren't as agitated or frustrated. Next. Poll question 6. People who live with dementia can have difficulty processing and responding to questions. How long should you wait for a response? Now, this is a general question and it depends on the person and so on, but this is just a general rule. Is 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 25 seconds, a minute? And actually, any one of those might be correct depending on the person, but just as a general rule. So about 2% said 5 seconds, 25% said 10 seconds, 42% said 25 seconds, and 31% said 1 minute. Okay, let's go on to the next slide and talk about this a little bit. And again, just to be real clear, it could be 1 minute for some people, it could be 5 seconds for some people. But as a general rule, people who live with dementia tend to have difficulty processing and responding to questions. Some of this information that I'm going to share with you might be important to interact with other individuals as well, people without dementia. But they take more time to respond even to simple requests. So even if you say, what, tell me your name or tell me your phone number or whatever it might be, it might take them a while to respond. Next. A general rule is to ask a question and wait for about 10 seconds so the person has time to answer. Though 10 seconds can seem like a very long time, it might be necessary. You don't necessarily need to have exactly 10 seconds, but if you ask a question and then just say to yourself, 1001, 1002, 1003, up to 10 seconds, give them some time to process. 10 seconds seems like a very, very long time when you're waiting for someone to respond. However, it might be necessary. If somebody responds in 2 seconds, great. If they take longer to respond, I would say after 30 seconds, ask the question again, because the person may have forgotten the question by that time. Also, make sure to find out what the person prefers to be called. Some prefer a first name, whereas others prefer to be referred to by a formal name such as Mr., Mrs., Ms., Dr., Reverend. And so to ask, what would you like to be called? And I know when I've taught funeral arrangements, we always say start off with Mr., Mrs., Dr., Reverend, whatever you might know, and have a formal name spoken first. And then if the person says, oh no, call me Carl, then you can certainly do that after the fact. Next slide. Don't tell the person to do anything, but invite them to participate. So for instance, we're going into the casket room now. Would you like to join us? Rather than, next, we're going into the casket room, please follow me. You will probably get a much better response from people if you ask for their participation rather than telling them to do something. Inviting gives people more control, and it's also more respectful to the person. Next. Often people with dementia have difficult time visualizing what another person is asking. So for example, if you ask a person if they'd like a cup of coffee, they might have a really hard time visualizing what you're talking about. And it could be that when you say a cup of coffee, they might visualize a cup, but they might not visualize the coffee being in the cup, or they might visualize coffee, but not being in a cup. They might not visualize anything. If visuals can be used, it may be helpful to the person to understand what you're asking is to give an example, such as having a cup of coffee, put it in front of them and say coffee, or would you like coffee, so they can see what you're actually asking. Keep directions very simple. So for example, if the person is being asked several things, give one direction at a time and wait for them to respond. And again, these suggestions could be used for other people as well. But rather than saying, what is your name? What is your address? What's your phone number? Say, what is your name? Once they've responded to that, then you can say, what is your phone number? What is your address? And so on, so that they just have one question to focus on at a time. Next. The funeral director needs to remain calm, and that can be difficult, especially if somebody's asking you to repeat yourself over and over again. However, if the funeral director becomes agitated or frustrated or shows any frustration or agitation, then the person with dementia might respond in the same way. If a person becomes really agitated or difficult for you to deal with, elicit the support from the care providers. They have been with the person much longer than you have. They know different ways of interacting with the person that might be helpful. So it might be necessary at times. Also, listen to the person's worries and frustrations and focus on listening for understanding, especially if the person is upset or frustrated. So really listen and say, can you tell me more? I'm not understanding. Can you give me some more examples? Something like that. Next question. This is something that most funeral directors do anyway, but you use simple terms when talking about the funeral or different elements of the funeral that are discussed. Although most funeral directors do this, you would want to say something like, what would you like to do with the person's ashes? It might be especially important to say something that is less technical than what will the person's final disposition of their cremated remains. Now, if somebody with dementia talks about cremated remains, you can certainly use that terminology, or final disposition. You can certainly use that terminology because they're using it. But typically, you would want to keep everything as simple and clear as possible. Next slide. Poll question 7. If a person with dementia loses an object and says you took it, it may be best to deny taking anything, tell the person they have dementia and they're imagining things, tell the person you will help them look for the lost object, or just ignore them. What would be, do you think, one of the ways that may be the most effective? Deny taking anything, 0. Tell the person with dementia that they have dementia and are imagining things, 0. Tell the person that you will help them look for the lost object, 96%, and ignore them. Actually, telling them that you'll help them find the object may be the best way to deal with it, because telling them that you didn't take it, or denying it oftentimes isn't helpful, because they have decided in their mind that someone took it and it must be you. So just saying something like, oh, let me go help you find that, or can everybody look for whatever the object might be. Okay, next slide. If a person with dementia forgets, you could say something like, oh no, you can't find your gloves, let's look for them. The other thing is that allow the person to have as much control as possible in decision making. And we've already talked a little bit about that in terms of arrangement meetings and so on. But even if the request seems totally unrealistic, the funeral director could say something like, you know, I've not done that before, what you're requesting, but I'll check into it. And if it's possible, I'll let you know. So even if somebody says, I would like to have an elephant at the visitation, rather than saying, no, that's not possible, or, oh, that would be too expensive, or whatever, it could just be that you would say, okay, well, I haven't done that before, so let me check into it and let you know. And then what you could do is say, you know what, I checked into it, and what you requested is not possible. I'm really sorry. And if the person says, what do you mean I requested something? Say, oh, I must have misunderstood. Or if they say, what did I request? You requested that an elephant be at the visitation. I did not. Oh, I must have misunderstood you. So that would be a good way to deal with it, rather than just saying no right up front. Just say, it's not possible, I checked into it. Okay, next. Respect the person, and they may require more personal space than others. So if you're talking to a person and they start backing up, let them back up as far as they need to back up. And that's true even if they're sitting at the table and you're talking to them and they're across the table and they start backing their chair up, let them back it up if they need to, because they may need to have that personal space, or feel more in control if they have more personal space. Also, the director needs to reintroduce themselves each time they encounter a person with dementia. So even if the funeral director just leaves the room for a few moments, when they return, they need to say something like, hi, I'm Mark, the funeral director, and maybe even point at a tag or a name tag if you have one. Don't say something like, do you remember me? Because this question could cause anxiety, especially if the person doesn't remember who you are or why they're there, and it may be very confusing. Next question. Next slide, not question, sorry. The other thing is that quite a few people, as dementia advances, they lose peripheral vision. And so it's important to remember that in interacting with a person and to be directly in front of them at their level. So if a person's sitting, sit. If a person's standing, stand, so they're at your level. Also, um, make sure to secure eye contact with a person with dementia prior to starting to talk. Because if they are looking around the room or they're not looking at you, they may not be focusing on you, and you ask a question, they may not even hear it. So just make sure that you remember that they may have difficulty with peripheral vision, and also that you need to secure their attention prior to starting a conversation. Next slide. Okay, we have objects in our lives that sometimes have designs that can be really confusing to people with dementia. If you look at the left-hand lower corner, you see a welcome mat that is black. And this actually happened with several times that I've heard of, where somebody gets up to the door and they won't step on the welcome mat. And people can't figure out why they won't step on the welcome mat or they won't go into the room. Well, it could very well be that the way they are envisioning that is that it's a hole. And so if they step on the hole, they're just going to go down. And that could be very scary to somebody to think that they would have to step into a hole. So what I would suggest is to think about, okay, this person isn't walking on the mat. What's going on? There's something about that mat that is causing some confusion. So either if you can take the mat away and say, you know what, we don't need this mat today. Or to say something like, you know, let's enter the room a different way, if that's a possibility. The rug at the top that is red and black, that could be perceived in different ways. It could be perceived as stairs. It could be perceived as snakes or worms of some sort. And so that might be very disconcerting to somebody thinking that there are snakes on the floor. The design in the middle, actually, the other day, just yesterday, I was in a building and the carpet was very close to this design. Again, that could be perceived as snakes. It could be perceived as worms or something that is crawling or moving, and that could be very disconcerting. So if there is a rug and you can replace it or you can move it, that's great. If you can't, maybe go to another room. If there's a picture that has the designs on it, maybe just take it down and say, you know what, we don't need this picture here right now, and just turn it around so the person doesn't have to look at it. And that might be really helpful. The other thing is, again, like with the mat, is to say this person is having a difficult time with this design. What might they be seeing in this design that I am not seeing? And then to try to accommodate for that in some way by either removing it or removing the person from the room. It could be that you'd hold the arrangement meeting in a different room or in a chapel or in another office, so that the person doesn't have to interact with something that they're seeing that other people aren't seeing. Next question, next slide. All right, to summarize. There are 5 key messages about dementia. Dementia is not a typical part of growing older. As we talked about, the percentages go up to about 13%, even with the highest percentage when people are older, in their 85 or above. Dementia is caused by a disease in the brain. It's not a disease in and of itself. Dementia is not just losing memory. It can affect thinking, communicating, and doing daily tasks. It's possible to live well with dementia. There are several people I know from our church community who have told me that they have been diagnosed with dementia a couple years ago, and with the medical advances, they're able to maintain a very healthy lifestyle and maintain their thinking and their memory. There's more to a person than dementia. They have a past, a present, a future that involves their personality, their likes, their dislikes. and their relationships. And so just to remember that people with dementia are still people that have all those things that they had prior to having the diagnosis. Next slide. A person with dementia may forget the news about the death, and this could cause them trauma to relearn about the death repeatedly. They may think that this is the first time they've ever heard it. And so why would you put them through that? And you'd have to ask yourself, is this best for them? They might grieve and forget, grieve over again, forget, grieve over again, and so on. And so you'd have to ask yourself, what is best for them? And what would be the most humane thing to do for that person? Next. If they lost the formation of short-term memory, no amount of reminding will help them to remember. You can tell them each time they ask a question, but that's not going to improve their memory if they've lost short-term memory. It's reasonable or fair to take a person with dementia to a funeral if it would be helpful to them. If it's not, don't do it. Should we put people in a traumatic experience, having a traumatic experience to benefit others, even though others might expect that a person with dementia would come to a funeral and so on? It's not worth it to that person. And it might cause them more harm and distress than not attending. Okay, next. All that being said, people make mistakes. And if a person is thought that it might be beneficial for them to attend a funeral or memorial service, it's a good idea to have a backup plan just in case that it's not helpful to them. So if the person attends and starts getting agitated, starts getting frustrated, starts getting anxious, have somebody in place that can leave the memorial or the funeral service with the person so that they're not alone and they can just leave. And so you could always have a backup plan just in case. The person could leave to the narthex. If it's in a place of worship, they could leave and go to another room. They could go outside, whatever might work for them. Next slide. Okay, poll question 8. Now, this might be a difficult question to answer, given that most of you have had some experience with people with dementia, but how much have you learned about dementia from the presentation? Have you learned nothing? Some, a lot, a great deal. And given that a lot of people have had experience, I suspect that some people might say nothing because they've already learned all this information from experience and from other sources. But go ahead and respond. All right. Some or nothing was 3%, some 32%, a lot 37%, and a great deal 28%. So I'm glad that even for people that have had experience, that you learned some, a lot, or a great deal of information about dementia. All right, next slide, and we'll open it up now for questions, comments, experiences, concerns. So what questions or comments do you have?
Yeah, so everyone, you know how to type in the questions in the question box. I do have one thus far. So as a funeral director in New York State, is my understanding we are not supposed to be making funeral arrangements with someone who is incapacitated or, for example, having dementia. What are the funeral directors that you have talked with and worked with doing to confirm one is incapacitated, having a dementia? Are they simply taking one's word for it or having documented proof? What is the best practice when being told the next of kin has dementia?
That's a really good question. One of the things that I would suggest is, first of all, to make sure that there are care providers with them, whether it's family members or whoever might be with them, and then to decide whether how this is going. If this seems like it's not going very well, then you could make some decisions about saying that I can't make funeral arrangements directly with this person, but I could possibly, if they had an assistant, to help interpret some of what's going on. But you're right that if somebody it's their next of kin and they come in, then you have to decide whether this is working out or if they are able to actually make the arrangements or not.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes to see if we have other questions that come in.
Sure.
I'm just going to do a few housekeeping items at the end while we wait. Again, please hold the number I gave you in the beginning of the webinar in case you are asked. The ending number is 77. That's 77. And again, I only need it if I ask you. Otherwise, you don't need to let me know. I'll just remind you, it will take 7 to 10 business days to have your credit reflected on your portal. And you'll also receive something in the mail. So please be patient with that. Okay, the next question is, how do you know if the person has dementia?
Well, two things. One is if it's self-reported or if somebody else reports that they have dementia. The other thing is if they seem very confused. It may not be dementia, but it may be something that is incapacitating them to fully participate in the arrangements and in the funeral process. A lot of times people will either self-identify, or if the dementia is too advanced, they probably can't do that. But a care provider could say this person has dementia. But if they are just asking questions over and over again, I would say then be really aware of what they are saying and how much impact that can have on the arrangements and so on.
Great. Well, at this time, we don't have any other questions. Mark, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon for a very informational webinar. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and let us know if you have any questions in the meantime.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thank you.